What you need to understand right away is that this is not rumor season noise or fan panic spiraling out of control. This is a real, tangible quarterback development that quietly reshaped the Steelers' possible future, and it starts with one uncomfortable truth. The veteran quarterback market just changed in a way Pittsburgh cannot ignore. The conversation begins with Aaron Rodgers, because of course it does. There is still uncertainty around what he plans to do, whether he continues playing, retires, or explores another situation. There has been a belief that if Rodgers decided to play another season, the Steelers might have an opportunity, maybe even a slight edge over other suitors. But that edge is fragile. Minnesota looks appealing. Their roster looks appealing. Their offensive weapons are appealing. When you start imagining a quarterback throwing to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison with Kevin O'Connell calling plays, you understand how quickly leverage can disappear. Rodgers could also simply walk away from football entirely. That possibility has always been on the table, and it still is. Now here's where things shift in a much more concrete way. ESPN's Phil Yates reported that the Atlanta Falcons restructured Kirk Cousins' contract. This was not a minor accounting move. The restructure ensures that in March, roughly $68 million becomes guaranteed to Cousins regardless of whether he is still on the Falcons or not. If Atlanta releases him, they are on the hook only for money already guaranteed, nothing additional. That all but screams one thing. Kirk Cousins is very likely headed to free agency, and when he hits free agency, he does so having already earned close to $100 million in guaranteed money over his career. That context matters because it changes how teams view him. Cousins has not started a meaningful football game in 2 years. Because of that, he will not command top-of-market money. In fact, compared to other quarterbacks who could be floating around in the same cycle, he might actually be one of the cheaper veteran options available. When you line him up against names like Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, Jameis Winston, or other quarterbacks who could theoretically be available, Cousins stands out as someone who could be signed without crippling your salary structure. And if the Steelers are staring at a future where they want experience under center but have little interest in drafting a quarterback from an upcoming class, this is where the dots begin to connect. This is where the theory becomes uncomfortable for a lot of fans, because it aligns far too closely with how Mike Tomlin has historically operated. There is significant evidence that Tomlin prefers quarterbacks who have been in the league, who understand NFL systems, who can absorb an offense quickly, and who have established reputations with coaches they have previously worked with. That kind of quarterback earns trust faster than a rookie or a young developmental player. Fair or not, that reality shapes decision-making inside the building. When you layer that philosophy on top of Cousins potentially becoming available, cheap by veteran standards, and experienced enough to step in immediately, you start to see why his name cannot be dismissed outright. And yes, Arthur Smith inevitably enters this conversation. Cousins' situation in Atlanta does not exist in a vacuum. If Smith's tenure there had gone differently, if that situation had stabilized instead of collapsing, this entire discussion might not even be happening. That is part of what makes this so frustrating. The idea that circumstances elsewhere could funnel a quarterback like Cousins into Pittsburgh feels less like a master plan and more like chaos finding its way to the Steelers' doorstep. Yet here we are, talking about it because the financial mechanics and timing line up too cleanly to ignore. None of this means the Steelers have decided anything. It does mean that if Rodgers walks away, and if Pittsburgh avoids drafting a quarterback, Cousins suddenly looks like a realistic name near the top of a veteran shortlist for the 2026 season. That possibility alone has already split opinion, sparked emotional reactions, and reopened the broader debate about direction, philosophy, and how much longer the team can rely on stopgap answers at the most important position in football. And that leads directly to the question Steelers fans need to wrestle with right now. If this path becomes real, how do you feel about the idea of Kirk Cousins potentially becoming the Steelers' quarterback? And what does that say about where you believe this franchise is headed? If you follow that thought all the way through, the real tension here is not just about Kirk Cousins as a player, but about what his availability would represent for the Steelers as an organization. This would not be a move driven by excitement, upside, or long-term vision. It would be a move driven by comfort, control, and familiarity. Cousins is the type of quarterback coaches believe they can manage. He knows how to prepare. He knows how to run a system. He does not need years of development or constant protection from the coaching staff. From a purely operational standpoint, he fits the profile of someone who can step in, keep the offense functional, and allow the rest of the roster to carry weight. And that, more than anything, is why his name sticks in this conversation. But that's also where the discomfort deepens for fans. Because if you strip away the contracts, the restructures, and the timing, what you are really asking is whether maintaining stability is enough anymore. Cousins would not arrive as a savior. He would arrive as a solution to a problem the Steelers have been trying to manage year by year instead of confronting head-on. The idea that he could be the answer says less about Cousins himself and more about where Pittsburgh stands mentally at the quarterback position. It suggests a team still prioritizing floor over ceiling, still believing it can win by minimizing mistakes rather than creating fear in opposing defenses. And then there's the context of competition. When fans joke about preferring an aging Joe Flacco, or even throw out absurd names just to cope with the idea, it reflects something deeper. It reflects fatigue. Fatigue from cycling through options that feel temporary, reactive, and uninspiring. Cousins becoming a Steeler would instantly reignite that frustration, because everyone understands what he is at this stage of his career. He is experienced. He is serviceable. He is limited. And while that may be enough to win games and stretches, it raises serious questions about whether it's enough to win when the margins shrink and the stakes rise. This is why the restructure in Atlanta matters so much. It didn't just open a door for Cousins. It forced teams like the Steelers to look in the mirror and ask whether they are truly committed to changing their quarterback trajectory, or whether they are still searching for the safest possible bridge to the next unknown. If Cousins hits the market, Pittsburgh will not be alone in evaluating him. But the Steelers' history, philosophy, and current posture make them uniquely vulnerable to this exact type of move. None of this is happening in isolation, and none of it guarantees an outcome. But the path is clear enough now that fans can see it forming in real time. The decisions made over the next year will reveal whether the organization is content staying on this cycle or finally ready to break it. That's why this conversation matters now, before anything becomes official, before narratives harden into reality. What cannot be ignored anymore is how this potential outcome reflects a pattern the Steelers have fallen into, and why so many fans feel uneasy even discussing it. Every time a veteran quarterback becomes available under circumstances like this, Pittsburgh is mentioned because the league understands how this organization thinks. The Steelers value continuity, leadership, and minimizing risk, sometimes to a fault. That reputation didn't appear overnight, and situations like this only reinforce it. Kirk Cousins being linked to Pittsburgh is not about a sudden belief that he elevates the franchise into a championship window. It is about believing he can prevent collapse, keep the offense organized, and allow the coaching staff to operate without reinventing everything from scratch. But here's the uncomfortable layer beneath all of it. Settling for functional at quarterback has quietly reshaped expectations. The bar is no longer dominance, intimidation, or forcing defenses to change game plans. The bar has become competence. That's why the emotional reaction from fans is so strong. It's not hatred toward Cousins as a professional. It's frustration with what his name symbolizes. Another season where the conversation is about managing games instead of attacking them. Another season where the margin for error is razor thin because explosive offense is not guaranteed. And yet, inside the building, there is logic to it. A veteran quarterback who understands protections, reads coverages quickly, and can keep the offense on schedule allows the team to lean on defense, field position, and discipline. That formula has kept the Steelers competitive year after year, even when the roster has clear limitations. From that perspective, Cousins fits. He would not arrive as a long-term answer, but as a stabilizer. The question is whether stability alone is still acceptable in a league that is increasingly defined by quarterbacks who dictate outcomes rather than survive them. This is why the coming months matter more than fans may realize. Whether it's Rodgers walking away, the draft being bypassed at quarterback, or Cousins officially hitting the open market, each domino pushes the Steelers closer to a decision that will define not just a season, but an era. Choosing a quarterback like Cousins would be an admission that the organization believes it can still compete its way, even as the league evolves around it. Rejecting that path would signal a willingness to endure short-term discomfort for the sake of long-term clarity. That tension is what makes this story so compelling, and why it deserves more than surface-level reactions. This is not about one player. It's about identity, philosophy, and how the Steelers see themselves in the modern NFL. There's also a reality that rarely gets said out loud, but every fan feels it. Moves like this don't happen in a vacuum of talent evaluation alone. They happen because of timelines. The Steelers are not a team that believes in tearing things down. They believe in competing every year, even if that competition lives in the gray area between contender and pretender. Bringing in a quarterback like Kirk Cousins would fit perfectly into that mindset. It keeps the team respectable. It keeps the floor high. It avoids the chaos that comes with a full reset. And internally, that matters a great deal more than public perception. But here's where the story tightens even more. If Cousins were to land in Pittsburgh, the expectations would be contradictory from day one. Fans would want wins, playoff progress, and proof that the move was justified. At the same time, many would already believe the ceiling is capped before a single snap is played. That creates a pressure cooker environment where every incomplete pass, every stalled drive, and every loss to an elite quarterback becomes symbolic of a larger failure. Cousins wouldn't just be judged on performance, he would be judged on philosophy. Fair or not, that's the weight attached to this possibility. And this is why the decision matters far beyond 2026. Choosing this path tells younger players in the locker room what the organization values most. It tells them whether the franchise believes it can truly chase the elite teams, or whether it believes its best chance is to stay organized and hope circumstances break its way. Neither approach is reckless, but only one aligns with how the modern NFL has rewarded teams over the last decade. What makes this situation fascinating is that it's unfolding quietly. There's no press conference, no official pursuit, just a contract restructure, a report, and a chain reaction of logic that suddenly makes an uncomfortable outcome feel plausible. That's how these things usually happen, not with fireworks, but with paperwork. And by the time fans realize it's real, the groundwork has already been laid. So now the ball is in the Steelers' court, even if they haven't officially touched it yet. Every move from here on out either pulls them closer to this outcome or steers them away from it. There's no middle ground anymore. The path is forming, and the organization will have to decide whether to follow it or finally break from what has become familiar. Another layer that fans can't ignore is how this decision would quietly influence everything else the Steelers do. Quarterback is not an isolated move. It shapes the draft board, free agency priorities, and even how aggressively the team manages its own veterans. If the front office commits to a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, even on a short-term basis, it signals that the roster around him is expected to be good enough right now. That means less patience for long development arcs and more urgency in squeezing value out of the current core. In other words, it becomes a bet that the window is open, even if it's not wide. That's where skepticism naturally creeps in, because Steelers fans have watched this team live in that exact space for years, competitive enough to stay relevant, disciplined enough to avoid collapse, but rarely explosive enough to truly scare the league. A move like this would feel like doubling down on that identity rather than redefining it. Cousins would be asked to execute, not elevate, to manage, not dominate. And while that can work in stretches, history shows how unforgiving the postseason becomes when your quarterback is not the one forcing defenses to adjust. At the same time, it would be dishonest to pretend there is no upside at all. A steady veteran quarterback reduces chaos. It allows coaches to install a full offense instead of trimming it down. It creates consistency in weekly preparation. Those things matter inside a locker room, especially for a team that prides itself on professionalism and structure. The danger is confusing stability with progress. They are not the same thing, and Steelers fans know that better than most. This is why the reaction to this possibility has been so emotional. It's not fear of losing games. It's fear of being stuck. Fear of another cycle where hope is measured in avoiding disaster instead of chasing greatness. And that's the tension sitting at the heart of this entire conversation. The Steelers are good at surviving transitions. The question is whether they are still willing to truly confront one. Nothing is official yet, and nothing is guaranteed. But paths in the NFL don't appear by accident. They form through timing, contracts, philosophy, and comfort. Right now, all of those elements are lining up in a way that makes this discussion impossible to dismiss. Whether the Steelers embrace it or walk away from it will tell us more about the future of this franchise than any single win or loss ever could. There's also the human element in all of this that rarely gets addressed when fans debate quarterbacks purely through stats or contracts. Whoever lines up under center in Pittsburgh inherits a locker room that expects accountability, toughness, and immediate credibility. A veteran like Kirk Cousins would walk in with instant authority simply because of his experience. That matters in a place like Pittsburgh, where leadership is not optional and where the quarterback is expected to be an extension of the coaching staff on the field. From that standpoint, the attraction becomes clearer, even if it's not exciting. But clarity does not equal comfort, because the deeper issue remains unresolved. At some point, every franchise has to decide whether it is willing to endure instability in pursuit of something greater. The Steelers have delayed that moment longer than most organizations, and in many ways, they've been rewarded for it with consistent competitiveness. The problem is that consistency without evolution eventually turns into stagnation, and that's what fans are reacting to when they hear names like Cousins linked to Pittsburgh. It feels less like a step forward and more like pressing pause again. What makes this moment different is that the league itself has changed around them. Quarterbacks are no longer just facilitators. They are systems. They bend defenses, dictate coverage, and force opponents to play uncomfortable football. When you face those quarterbacks in January, the margin between steady and special becomes brutally obvious. That's why this decision carries so much weight. It's not about whether Cousins can win games in October. It's about whether that approach can realistically survive in the postseason against the best teams in the AFC. And yet, the Steelers have always believed in their formula: defense, discipline, experience, and controlled offense. That belief has not vanished. If anything, it has hardened. That's why this potential move feels